In the summer of 1994, a 14-year-old girl walked out of her middle school classroom in Seattle and vanished into the warm July afternoon. Tanya Marie Frazier was shy, responsible, and always where she was supposed to be. She had a job waiting for her that day, a paycheck coming that week, and dreams about buying pagers for her and her little sister. 5 days later, a man walking his dog discovered her body hidden in a grove of trees on Capitol Hill. For 31 years, her family searched for answers. For 31 years, investigators never stopped looking. For 31 years, the man responsible walked free among them, released from prison under a law designed to give second chances. But what investigators discovered about where he had been hiding would make their blood run cold. This is the story of how DNA technology finally caught up with a predator who thought he had gotten away with the unthinkable. Before we dive in, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe to Seek Stories for more true crime cases. Seattle in the summer of 1994 was a city caught between grunge rock and the dawn of the tech boom. Microsoft was rising. Nirvana had just lost Kurt Cobain that April. The city was changing, growing, becoming something new. But in neighborhoods like Mount Baker, just south of Capitol Hill, life still moved at a slower pace. Kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Neighbors knew each other's names. People left their doors unlocked. It felt safe because it had always been safe. In a modest home in this neighborhood lived the Frazier family. Teresa Frazier was raising her daughters with the kind of values that seemed old-fashioned even in the 90s. Hard work, community service, faith, responsibility. Her oldest daughter, Tanya Marie, embodied all of those values. At 14 years old, Tanya was not like other teenagers. She was quiet, almost painfully shy, the kind of girl who preferred spending time with her younger sister Tiara rather than chasing boys or running with the popular crowd. The two sisters were tomboys, scrappy and playful, always getting into harmless mischief together. They had that special bond that only siblings close in age can develop, the kind where you can communicate with just a look, where you know what the other person is thinking before they say it. Tanya had a gentle spirit that drew people to her. Everyone who knew her loved her. She was sweet, funny, generous to a fault. She made life better just by being present. Her sister Tiara would later say that Tanya had this way of making people feel safe, heard, understood. She stood at an average height for her age, with a slight, almost delicate build that made her seem younger than 14. She wore her dark hair simply, no elaborate styling, no teenage experimentation with fashion or makeup. Tanya was not trying to impress anyone. She was genuine in a way that felt rare. That June, Tanya had graduated from Washington Middle School, finishing 8th grade with plans to start high school in the fall. It should have been an exciting time, full of possibilities and that particular teenage energy that comes with moving up to the next chapter. But Tanya was not the type to get swept up in social drama or peer pressure. She was focused, mature beyond her years. She had just gotten her first real job. The Chicken Soup Brigade was a Seattle organization that provided meals for people in need, particularly those affected by HIV and AIDS, during a time when the epidemic was ravaging communities and stigma kept many people from getting help. Tanya volunteered there regularly, and when a position opened up at their Jackson Street thrift shop, she jumped at the opportunity. At 14, she understood service. She understood that some people needed help, and that she could be part of the solution. The job was more than just a paycheck. It represented independence, responsibility, adulthood. She was excited about getting her first paycheck, and she had already made plans for the money. She wanted to buy pagers for herself and Tiara so they could stay in touch throughout the day, even when they were apart. This was Tanya Marie Frazier in the summer of 1994. Not a rebel, not a runaway, not a troubled teen looking for escape. Just a good kid trying to do the right things in a complicated world. Her family attended St. Clement's Episcopal Church in the Mount Baker neighborhood, and faith was woven into the fabric of their daily lives. Tanya was the kind of teenager who actually wanted to go to church, who found meaning in the rituals and community, who took the teachings seriously. That summer, she was enrolled in classes at Meany Middle School on Capitol Hill. Not because she had failed anything or gotten into trouble. Summer school was just something she was doing to stay on track, to keep learning, to prepare for high school. Every weekday morning, she would make her way to Meany Middle School, attend her classes, and then head to her job at the thrift shop. It was a routine she followed without complaint, and Teresa Frazier knew that schedule by heart. She knew when Tanya left for school. She knew when classes ended. She knew when her daughter was supposed to be at work. This was not a girl who disappeared for hours without explanation. This was not a teenager who worried her mother with unexplained absences or secretive behavior. The neighborhood around Meany Middle School was busy during the summer session. Kids walked to and from class, some alone, some in groups. The streets were familiar, the faces recognizable. It felt safe. But safety is often an illusion. Predators do not always look like strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes they are right there in the neighborhood, hiding in plain sight, watching, waiting for the perfect moment when no one is paying close enough attention. And on Monday, July 18th, 1994, that moment came. The weather was perfect that day. Warm Pacific Northwest summer sunshine, the kind that breaks through the usual cloud cover and makes everyone remember why they love living in Seattle. Tanya woke up, got ready, and left for her summer school class just like she had done many times before. She walked into Meany Middle School around mid-morning. She sat through her class. She took notes. She talked with classmates. Everything was normal, routine, unremarkable. When class ended that afternoon, Tanya gathered her things and left the building. Several of her classmates saw her near a bus stop close to the school, the place where students typically waited for their rides home. And that is when she caught someone's attention. A man approached her, someone the other kids did not recognize, someone who did not look like he belonged there among the middle school students. The witnesses would later describe him as a white male, somewhere around 30 to 40 years old, average height, average build. Nothing particularly distinctive. The kind of person who could blend into any crowd and disappear from memory 5 minutes later. But what happened next would be burned into those witnesses' minds forever. They saw Tanya talking to this man. They saw her walk with him toward a truck that was parked nearby. And then they lost sight of her. At the time, none of the kids thought anything was particularly wrong. Maybe he was a family friend. Maybe he was giving her a ride. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. Teenagers do not always think the worst of situations, especially in broad daylight, especially in a familiar neighborhood. But Tanya never made it to work that day. When the hours passed and she did not show up at the Chicken Soup Brigade's thrift shop, the staff noticed immediately. Tanya was reliable. She did not miss shifts. She always called if something came up, something felt wrong. When Teresa Frazier realized her daughter had not come home from work, a cold dread began to settle in her chest, the kind of feeling that every parent has nightmares about. She started calling around, asking friends and neighbors if they had seen Tanya. No one had. It was as if Tanya had simply evaporated from the streets of Seattle. Teresa picked up the phone and called the Seattle Police Department. Her hands were shaking. Her voice cracked as she spoke the words no parent should ever have to say. My daughter is missing. But what happened next would become one of the most painful parts of this entire tragedy. The police did not believe her. When Teresa Frazier reported her daughter missing on the evening of July 18th, she expected urgency. She expected search parties, alerts, helicopters, dogs. Instead, she got skepticism. The initial police report labeled Tanya as a runaway. Officers told Teresa that teenage girls run away all the time, that Tanya probably just did not want to tell her mother where she was going, that someone likely knew where she was, but was not talking. Teresa felt like she was losing her mind. She tried to explain. Tanya was not that kind of kid. She was not rebellious. She did not have a secret boyfriend she was sneaking off to see. She did not have problems at home. She was responsible. She had a job she loved. She had plans for her future. This was not a runaway situation. But the police had heard it all before. They had seen hundreds of missing teenager reports, and in their experience, most of them came home within a day or two, embarrassed and apologetic. They did not understand that every hour that passed without hearing from Tanya was another hour of agony for her family. The first night was the worst. Teresa could not sleep. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in her mind. Had she missed something? Had Tanya said anything unusual that morning? Was there some sign she should have seen? Her mind kept circling back to the same thought, over and over, like a nightmare she could not wake up from. Where is my daughter? Tayara was distraught. She kept waiting for Tanya to walk through the door with some crazy story about where she had been, some explanation that would make everything okay again. She kept listening for the sound of her sister's footsteps, her sister's voice, her sister's laugh. But the house stayed silent. The door stayed closed. The phone did not ring. On Tuesday morning, when Tanya still had not come home, Teresa knew with absolute certainty that something terrible had happened. She could feel it in her bones, that primal mother's intuition that something was wrong with her child. The family put up missing person flyers around the neighborhood. They walked the streets calling Tanya's name, asking everyone they encountered if they had seen a shy 14-year-old girl with dark hair. The community rallied around them. Neighbors joined the search. Members of St. Clement's Episcopal Church organized prayer vigils. But as Tuesday turned into Wednesday, and Wednesday turned into Thursday, hope began to crack under the weight of reality. Where was Tanya? What they did not know, what they could not have imagined, was that by Wednesday, July 20th, just 2 days after she disappeared, Tanya was already gone. Somewhere in the wooded ravines of Capitol Hill, hidden from the paths and streets where people walked their dogs and jogged and went about their normal lives, something terrible had unfolded. The details are too disturbing to recount. What is known is that Tanya fought, and ultimately she lost her life to violence that no child should ever experience. But her family did not know that yet. They were still searching, still hoping, still believing that maybe somehow she would be found safe. By Wednesday, even the most skeptical police officers had to admit this did not look like a typical runaway situation. Detectives Greg Mixel and Tom Pike were assigned to the case, and they started conducting interviews, retracing Tanya's last known movements, talking to her classmates about what they had seen that Monday afternoon near the bus stop. The description of the man was frustratingly vague. White male, average height, nothing distinctive. It was not much to go on, but it was something. Detectives canvassed the area around Meany Middle School, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual on July 18th. They talked to residents, business owners, anyone who might have been in the area that afternoon. What they did not know yet was that the answer was right there, right across the street from the school. But they would not make that connection for 31 years. Saturday, July 23rd, dawned overcast and gray. A Korean War veteran named Robert was out walking his dog through a wooded area near the 2200 block of East Highland Drive in Capitol Hill. It was a route he took often, a quiet place where his dog could run and explore off the main paths. As he walked deeper into the grove of trees, he noticed something, a smell. It was faint at first, but as he got closer, it became unmistakable. He had been in combat. He had seen things most people never see. He knew what death smelled like. His dog led him off the main path down into a small ravine where the underbrush was thick and tangled. And there, partially hidden by branches and leaves, he saw her. Tanya Marie Frazier was lying on her right side, her body partially clothed, just blocks from where she had last been seen 5 days earlier. Robert immediately called the police, his voice steady despite what he had just witnessed, that military training kicking in even decades after the war. Within minutes, the area was swarmed with officers, detectives, and crime scene investigators. This was no longer a missing person case. Detective Cloyd Steiger arrived at the scene and felt his stomach turn. He was brand new to the homicide unit. This was his first homicide case. And it was a child. He would never forget it. Years later, long after he retired, he would still think about Tanya Frazier, still wonder if there was something more he could have done. The crime scene was brutal. There was a bloody handprint on her body, a chilling signature left by whoever had done this. The King County Medical Examiner would later determine that she had been there since Wednesday, July 20th, meaning she had been lying in those woods for 3 days before anyone found her. Seattle did not have a dedicated crime scene investigation team in 1994, so detectives like Mixel, Pike, and Steiger had to do double duty, processing the scene themselves while simultaneously trying to understand what had happened. They carefully documented everything, collecting physical evidence, taking photographs, searching for any clue that might lead them to the person responsible. And they found DNA. Biological evidence that could potentially identify whoever did this. In 1994, DNA technology was still relatively new in criminal investigations, but the detectives understood its potential. They made sure every piece of evidence was collected properly, stored correctly, preserved for future analysis. They did not know it then, but that decision to be meticulous, to follow every protocol, would be the key to solving this case 3 decades later. When the medical examiner removed Tanya's body from the ravine, the reality of what had happened finally hit the investigators with full force. This was not a random accident. This was not a tragic mistake. This was deliberate. The news reached Teresa Frazier that Saturday afternoon. After 5 days of living in a nightmare, hoping against hope that Tanya would be found alive, she received the call that shattered her world into pieces that would never quite fit back together. Tanya was gone. Someone had taken her daughter. Someone had hurt her. Someone had left her in those woods like she was nothing. The pain was incomprehensible, a weight that crushed the air from Teresa's lungs and made it impossible to think about anything except the fact that Tanya would never walk through that door again. She would never laugh with Tiara again. She would never get her paycheck. She would never buy those pagers. She would never start high school, never fall in love, never have children of her own, never grow old. All of it, every possibility, every dream, every moment that should have been hers, was gone, stolen. Tara could not process it. 1 minute her big sister was there, protecting her, making her laugh, planning their future together. The next minute she was just gone, erased from the world by someone else's cruelty. The Mount Baker community was devastated. Tanya's story was all over the news. Parents hugged their children tighter. People started locking their doors. The sense of safety that had defined the neighborhood evaporated overnight. Somebody had done this. Somebody was out there, walking the same streets, breathing the same air, pretending to be normal while hiding a terrible secret. But who? In the days following the discovery of Tanya's body, Seattle police launched a massive investigation. Detectives Mixel and Pike worked around the clock, following every lead, interviewing every possible witness, building a timeline of Tanya's last known hours. They interviewed the classmates who had seen her near the bus stop, pressing them for more details. The description remained frustratingly generic, but there was one detail that stood out. The man had been near a truck, and Tanya had walked toward that truck with him. This suggested she might have known him, or at least felt comfortable enough to approach his vehicle. Tanya was shy and cautious according to everyone who knew her. She was not the type to go with a complete stranger. So either this person had used some kind of ruse to gain her trust, or he was someone she recognized. Detectives began a more thorough canvass of the neighborhood around Meany Middle School. They knocked on every door, talked to every resident, documented every detail. And during these interviews, they spoke with a family who lived directly across the street from the school. The family was cooperative. They had not seen anything unusual that day. But during the conversation, one name came up in passing, a family member who sometimes visited, a man with a troubled past. His name was Mark Anthony Russ. At the time, he was just one name among dozens that surfaced during the investigation. The detectives made a note of it and moved on to other leads, other theories, other suspects who seemed more promising. They had no idea they had just walked past the answer to their case. A few weeks after Tanya's body was discovered, another piece of evidence surfaced. A woman walking near Longfellow Creek Golf Course in West Seattle, miles away from Capitol Hill, stumbled upon a pile of items that seemed out of place. She looked closer and realized they were personal belongings, a school book, clothing, a wallet. She called the police, and when they arrived, they quickly determined that everything belonged to Tanya Frazier. Her belongings had been dumped there, discarded like trash, as if whoever had taken her life wanted to erase every trace of her existence. This discovery added another layer to the investigation. Why West Seattle? What was the connection? Detectives began mapping out the area, trying to understand the geography of the crime, looking for patterns, searching for meaning in the chaos. The investigation consumed them. Detective Steiger, despite being new to homicide, threw himself into the case with the kind of intensity that would define his entire career. He conducted interview after interview, followed up on tip after tip, refused to let any lead go unchecked. The case developed multiple suspects over those first few months. One was a janitor who worked at the school. He had access to the building, knew the students' schedules, had been seen in the area around the time Tanya disappeared. Detectives brought him in for questioning multiple times, pressed him on his whereabouts, looked for any connection to West Seattle, any reason he might have targeted Tanya. But something did not add up. The more they investigated, the less the evidence supported this theory. The janitor ultimately volunteered to provide a DNA sample, confident that it would clear him. And it did. His DNA did not match the biological evidence found at the crime scene. Another suspect emerged, someone who seemed even more compelling. This person had connections to both Capitol Hill and West Seattle. They had been in the area that day. Their behavior after Tanya's disappearance had been suspicious. Detectives zeroed in, convinced they finally had their answer. This person also volunteered DNA, also insisted they had nothing to do with Tanya's disappearance. And once again, the DNA did not match. The investigators hit a wall. They had biological evidence. They had a DNA profile of the unknown male who had been with Tanya. But without a match in any database, it was just data. It could not tell them who had done this. As months turned into years, the case went cold in the public eye. Newspapers stopped running updates, television stations moved on to newer tragedies. But inside the Seattle Police Department, Tanya Marie Frazier was never forgotten. Every detective who worked homicide cases knew about Tanya. Her file was passed from one generation of investigators to the next, each new detective reading through the reports, studying the evidence, hoping to see something that previous investigators had missed. The case became a sacred trust within the department. Detective Steiger carried it with him throughout his entire career. He retired in 2016, more than 2 decades after Tanya's case, and he still thought about her constantly. He still wondered who had done it. He still hoped that someday, somehow, justice would come. In 2004, 10 years after Tanya's case, advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to reanalyze the evidence with more sophisticated techniques. They confirmed that the biological evidence came from 2 sources, Tanya and an unknown male. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the combined DNA index system used by law enforcement across the United States. No hit. Whoever had taken Tanya's life either had never been arrested and had their DNA collected, or their sample was not in the system for some other reason. Years passed. Technology improved. In 2018, a new hope emerged. Forensic genetic genealogy had just made headlines with the arrest of the Golden State Killer in California, a case that had been cold for decades until investigators used DNA and public genealogy databases to identify the suspect. Seattle police decided to try the same approach with Tanya's case. They sent the DNA profile to experts who specialized in genetic genealogy, hoping that by building a family tree from the DNA, they could narrow down potential suspects. But they immediately hit a problem. The DNA sample was mixed, meaning it contained genetic material from multiple sources that had become intermingled. This made it incredibly complicated to separate out and analyze using genealogy techniques. The experts tried. The technology was not there yet. In 2022, they requested another analysis, hoping that improvements in DNA extraction and sequencing technology might finally crack the code. Again, the results were inconclusive. Then, in 2024, they tried one more time. By this point, the science had advanced even further. Forensic laboratories had developed new techniques for separating and analyzing mixed DNA profiles, techniques that simply had not existed a few years earlier. The Washington State Patrol Crime Lab took on the challenge with renewed determination. And this time, something incredible happened. The scientists were able to successfully separate the DNA profiles and create a clean, usable sample from the unknown male. They ran it through the databases again, cross-referencing it against millions of profiles. On October 16, 2025, 31 years after Tanya Marie Frazier disappeared, the database finally returned a hit. Mark Anthony Russ. That name. The one that had come up so briefly during the initial investigation in 1994. The family member who lived across the street from Meany Middle School, now definitively linked to Tanya's case through irrefutable scientific evidence. Investigators pulled his file. What they found made their blood run cold. Mark Anthony Russ was not a minor offender who had made one mistake. His criminal history read like a roadmap of escalating violence, a pattern of behavior that should have kept him locked away forever. In 1987, 7 years before Tanya disappeared, Russ had attacked his girlfriend with a weapon, causing severe injuries that required 175 stitches at Harborview Medical Center. According to charging documents, he had called her while she was in the hospital and made threatening statements. That conviction was for second-degree assault with a deadly weapon. In 1991, just 3 years before Tanya's case, Russ was convicted of second-degree robbery for taking money from the Washington Athletic Club while telling employees he had a weapon. Then came 1996, 2 years after Tanya disappeared. Russ broke into a house in Tukwila where a woman was working as a cleaner. He demanded money, said he had a weapon, and forced his way inside. He led the terrified woman through the house, searching for valuables, and then he attempted to assault her. He was convicted of first-degree attempted rape, first-degree burglary, and first-degree robbery with sexual motivation. Under Washington State's three strikes law, which had just been passed in 1993, Russ was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This was his third strike. He would never be released, or so everyone thought. Washington State was the first in the nation to pass a three-strikes law in 1993. The law was designed to protect the public by ensuring that repeat violent offenders would be locked away for life after their third serious felony conviction. And for 25 years, it worked. Russ sat in prison year after year, knowing he would die there. But then the law changed. In 2019, the Washington State Legislature removed second-degree robbery from the list of offenses that counted as a strike. The reasoning was sound. Second-degree robbery was the lowest-level crime on the three strikes list. Legislators and criminal justice reformers argued that it did not rise to the same level of seriousness as crimes like rape or assault, and that people should not spend the rest of their lives in prison for relatively minor offenses. However, this change was not retroactive. It only applied to new cases moving forward. Then came 2021. State Senator Jeannie Darnell from Tacoma sponsored Senate Bill 5164, which changed everything. This bill allowed inmates to petition for resentencing if one of their strike offenses was second-degree robbery. The bill had strong support. Prosecutors, including King County Prosecuting Attorney Dan Satterberg, testified that second-degree robbery was an outlier on the three strikes list. Retired judges spoke in favor. Criminal justice reform advocates argued that the law had a particularly disparate impact on minority communities. At a legislative committee hearing, Senator Darnell spoke passionately about hope, about second chances, about undoing harm. The bill passed both chambers with bipartisan support. Governor Jay Inslee signed it into law. According to Senator Darnell, the change would apply to 64 inmates who were serving life sentences with second-degree robbery as one of their strikes. Later, in 2021, Mark Anthony Russ applied for resentencing under the new law. His application was granted. After serving 25 years in prison, Mark Anthony Russ walked out of those prison gates a free man. His life sentence was vacated. His record still showed his convictions, but legally he had served his time, and nobody knew he had taken Tanya Marie Frazier's life. For the next 4 years, Russ lived in Seattle. He was supposed to register as a Level 3 sex offender, the highest risk category. But investigators later discovered he was not complying with those requirements. He moved around. He stayed off the radar. He blended back into the community. By 2023 and 2024, he had been arrested again on minor charges in Seattle Municipal Court. But he was not being monitored closely. He was not considered a high-priority threat. The system had let him slip through the cracks. Meanwhile, detectives continued working Tanya's case, not knowing that the man they were looking for was walking free just miles from where he had committed his crime 3 decades earlier. Then came October 2025, the DNA match. Suddenly, everything made horrifying sense. Russ's mother had lived across the street from Meany Middle School in 1994. He had been visiting that neighborhood regularly. He had seen Tanya, a shy 14-year-old girl walking to and from summer school, vulnerable and alone. On July 18, 1994, he had approached her near the bus stop. He had used some kind of ruse to gain her trust. He had led her to his truck, and he had taken her life. The location where Tanya's belongings were found in West Seattle, near Longfellow Creek Golf Course, was close to where Russ had lived at the time. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. On the evening of November 4, 2025, Seattle police homicide detectives made a phone call they had been waiting 31 years to make. They called Teresa Frazier and told her they had made an arrest in Tanya's case. Teresa's emotions were overwhelming: relief that there was finally an answer, rage that this man had been out there all this time, grief that no arrest would ever bring Tanya back. "It was like a weight was taken off my shoulders to put a face with the person that did it," she told reporters. But she also said, "We finally have answers, but then also I wanted to cry too, because it's not going to bring her back." On November 5, 2025, Mark Anthony Russ was formally charged with first-degree murder with sexual motivation and a deadly weapon enhancement. If convicted, it would be his third strike again, a mandatory life sentence without parole. Seattle Police Chief Sean Barnes held a press conference to announce the arrest. He spoke with emotion about Tanya, emphasizing that her life had value, that she was not just a case number. "She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend," he said. "She had just finished middle school, worked, and did volunteer service. Her life mattered. Let me say that again. Her life mattered." Detective Rolf Norton credited the original detectives, Mixel and Pike, for their meticulous work in 1994. The fact that we're here 31 years later talking about how physical evidence got us to the finish line is really remarkable and a testament to their skills, he said. Without that careful evidence collection, without the proper storage of DNA samples over 3 decades, without the persistent belief that justice would eventually come, this case would never have been solved. Russ waived his first court appearance. At a subsequent hearing, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. As of late November 2025, he remains in King County Jail without bail, awaiting trial. The arrest sparked immediate and fierce debate about the 2021 law that had freed Russ from prison. Critics argued that the law had been a dangerous mistake, that it had prioritized the rights of convicted criminals over public safety, that it had directly enabled Russ to avoid justice for Tanya's case for 4 additional years. Supporters of the law countered that Russ's case was a tragic anomaly, not a reason to abandon criminal justice reform. They pointed out that the 63 other inmates released under the same law had not committed such terrible crimes. But for Teresa Frazier and her family, the debate was beside the point. Their daughter was gone. Nothing would change that. Tanya's sister Tiara spoke to reporters outside the courthouse after Russ's arraignment, her voice breaking with emotion. "She's never been forgotten," she said. "We never gave up. None of us. Never." Rose Winquist, a private investigator who had been working with the Frazier family for years, stood beside them. "We knew this day would come," she said. "I knew this day would come. Around 1995 when I heard there was DNA, but it's taken this long. For what reasons I'm not real sure, but nonetheless, here we are." The family had waited. The investigators had never stopped working. And finally, after 31 years, there was an answer to the question that had haunted them all. Who took Tanya Marie Frazier's life? Now they knew. Even with an arrest, even with DNA evidence, even with a suspect in custody, there are questions that may never be fully answered. What exactly happened on that July afternoon in 1994? How did Russ convince Tanya to go with him? What lies did he tell? What promises did he make? According to court documents, prosecutors believe Russ seemingly chose Tanya at random. She was a stranger to him, just a girl walking from school. He saw an opportunity, and he took it. The randomness of it is perhaps the most terrifying aspect. Tanya did everything right. She was not taking risks. She was not in a dangerous situation. She was just existing in her neighborhood, walking from school to work, living her life. And that was enough to make her a target. The witnesses who saw Tanya with Russ near his truck could not recall the exact conversation, could not remember if she seemed afraid or uncomfortable. The interaction happened so quickly, so casually, that no one thought to intervene. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was too late. There is also the haunting question of whether there were other victims. Russ had a long history of violence against women. A man with that pattern does not just commit one isolated incident. Investigators are now looking back through decades of unsolved cases, wondering if Russ's DNA might connect him to other crimes, other missing girls, other families who have been searching for answers. Some people have asked why Russ was not a more prominent suspect earlier in the investigation. The truth is, his name came up. Detectives noted it during the initial canvass. But without DNA technology to prove his involvement, and with dozens of other leads to follow, he slipped through the cracks. It is a painful reminder that even the most diligent investigations can miss critical connections. There is also the broader question about how many other people like Mark Anthony Russ are out there. Men who committed terrible crimes, served their time, or were released under legal reforms, and are now living among us with secrets buried in their past. The debate around criminal justice reform is complex and nuanced. There are legitimate arguments on both sides. But Tanya's case illustrates the very real consequences when the system makes mistakes, when laws change without fully considering the implications, when second chances are given to people who have proven time and again that they pose a danger to society. For Tanya's family, the arrest brings a measure of peace, but it does not erase the pain. 31 years is a lifetime. Tayara was just a child when her sister disappeared. She is now a woman in her 40s who has had to navigate her entire adult life without her big sister. She got married without Tanya there to celebrate with her. She had children that Tanya will never meet. She built a life around an absence that can never be filled. Teresa Frazier spent more than 3 decades searching for answers, refusing to let her daughter's case fade into obscurity. She attended every possible meeting with detectives. She spoke to every reporter who would listen. She kept Tanya's name alive in the public consciousness. The community never forgot, she said. They never, ever forgot about her. St. Clement's Episcopal Church, where Tanya worshipped and found community, still remembers her. The Chicken Soup Brigade, where she volunteered with such dedication, still honors her memory. The neighborhood of Mount Baker, forever changed by her loss, still carries the weight of what happened on their streets. Imagine being a parent in that situation. Your child walks out the door one morning, and you never see her alive again. You spend 5 days searching, hoping, praying, and then you get the call that your worst nightmare has come true. And then you spend 31 years waiting for justice. 31 years of birthdays that will never be celebrated. 31 years of holidays with an empty chair at the table. 31 years of wondering who did this to your child and why they were allowed to walk free. Will this case go to trial? Will Russ finally have to face what he did in open court? Or will there be a plea deal that spares everyone the trauma but also denies the public a complete accounting? These questions remain unanswered as the legal process moves forward. What we do know is this: Tanya Marie Frazier's life mattered. She was not just a victim, not just a cold case file, not just a sad story. She was a real person with hopes and dreams, and a future that was stolen from her. She was funny and sweet and generous. She loved her little sister. She cared about helping people in need. She worked hard and followed the rules and tried to do everything right. She deserved so much better than what happened to her on that July day in 1994. 20 years from now, when this case is mentioned in law enforcement circles, detectives will talk about the importance of evidence preservation, about how meticulous work in 1994 led to justice in 2025. They will talk about DNA technology, about forensic genealogy, about the evolution of investigative techniques. But we cannot let those technical discussions overshadow the human cost at the center of this story. Seattle in 2025 is a very different city than it was in 1994. Technology has transformed almost every aspect of daily life. The grunge scene has given way to tech culture. The streets have changed. The population has exploded. But some things remain constant. Families still grieve for lost children. Detectives still work cold cases late into the night. Communities still come together to demand justice when one of their own is taken too soon. Tanya Marie Frazier's case reminds us that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it takes decades. Sometimes it requires technology that did not exist when the crime was committed. Sometimes it demands that investigators refuse to give up, even when leads go cold, even when years pass without answers, even when the public moves on. The detectives who worked this case across 3 decades, from Mixel and Pike in 1994 to Norton, and countless others who kept pushing forward, deserve recognition for their dedication. They carried Tanya with them. They never forgot her. And when science finally gave them the tool they needed to solve her case, they were ready. This case stands as a testament to the power of DNA technology in solving crimes. In 1994, genetic evidence was cutting-edge but limited. Today, we can extract usable DNA from samples that would have been considered too compromised just a few years ago. But technology alone is not enough. It requires detectives who understand its value, who preserve evidence properly, who never stop asking questions. It requires prosecutors who are willing to pursue cases even decades after they went cold. It requires a community that refuses to forget. As Mark Anthony Russ awaits trial, Teresa Frazier and Tiara are preparing themselves for what comes next. There will be hearings, motions, possibly a trial. They will have to hear details about what happened to Tanya that they may not have known before. They will have to face the man who took her from them. It will be painful. It will be traumatic. But they have waited 31 years for this moment, and they are ready to see it through. Whatever happens in the courtroom, nothing will bring Tanya back. Nothing will give Teresa the chance to watch her daughter graduate high school, go to college, fall in love, have a career, build a life. Nothing will give Tiara her big sister back, the person who protected her and made her laugh and planned adventures with her. But maybe, just maybe, knowing that the person responsible has finally been held accountable will allow them to find some measure of peace. Maybe Tanya's story will help other families who are still waiting for answers about their own missing loved ones. Maybe it will remind us all that behind every cold case is a real person whose life mattered, whose loss created ripples that continue to spread through families and communities long after the headlines fade. Tanya Marie Frazier was 14 years old. She loved her family. She believed in service. She worked hard. She had dreams. She deserved to live. And now, 31 years later, she finally has justice. If you found value in this deep dive into Tanya's case, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss future episodes. Share this video with others who appreciate true crime storytelling that honors the victims and their families. And most importantly, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts about this case and the long journey to justice. Remember Tanya Marie Frazier. Say her name. Tell her story. Because her life mattered. Thank you for watching.